So, the leading under pressure inventory is this fantastic way to think more intentionally about how we're showing up under pressure. And this has been an amazing season for me as we're going through the entire WiLD toolkit over this year because it's allowed me to think more deeply about these different pieces of data that users of the WiLD toolkit get access to. And in the leading under pressure inventory, the first thing that's addressed, I think it's on page 3, is it actually brings out your narrative where you're asked to describe a high pressure moment that you have been facing when you were finishing the tool. And for those people who have finished the tool a little while ago, that experience may be something in your past. But I think it's also important, and I love to make notes on my actual feedback report into what I'm facing right now if I want to make it relevant to this moment. So it's just interesting. So taking a look at that, you can see kind of this pressure moment that you were thinking of. And here's what is so fascinating. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into pressure as we set up what it means to have a conversation with someone else about our tendencies under pressure. And so what is this thing that is pressure? And so for years I have defined pressure as this invisible force that tells you that something is changing. It tells you that something is changing, but we can't see it. It's like when an airplane takes off, and we can tell that the cabin pressure is changing. We know that that's happening, but it's something we can't see. And I think in the same way, pressure matters. And what we found over the years is that pressure, through our research, is that, and boy, this dates back to some of the original research on the crucible experiences that actually shape leaders, is that these pressure moments had some specific characteristics that they caused people to either to move toward a higher attention to themselves or a higher connection or attention to what other people think. And that's for another time. But what I want to go a little bit deeper into this concept of pressure. And here's what's fascinating. When you begin to look up pressure, you'll immediately see references to like weather systems, to high or low pressure systems. And what's fascinating about that, I am no meteorologist, believe me, but that this is a tendency, it's kind of overstated, but that higher pressure systems tend to produce actual sunshine, like nicer days. Lower pressure systems tend to produce rain. Now that, I would say, for any of you who are meteorologists out there, is quite overstated because there are a lot of other variables, including the rotation of the earth, by the way, and temperature and other things that affect whether or not we get sun or rain. But those are kind of, that's a general statement I think is fairly true. Now what's also interesting, so but when it comes to weather systems and pressure, there's also multiple variables that are affecting what happens in terms of the weather. Now, here's another thing. So I want to get into a couple definitions of pressure and get into some of the science behind pressure. So listen to this. Pressure is defined as the amount of force exerted per area. So to create a large amount of pressure, you can either exert a large force over a large area, so push hard over a large area, or exert force over a small area, or possibly both. And what's interesting is we experience this all the time when we think about pressures that we face. So some of them feel like this, sometimes pressure feels like this massive force that's kind of all over all aspects of our life. And other times it's more acute and a specific pressure in a specific moment. I think that's kind of true of people's experience. So here's the second definition that is so interesting to think about. Pressure is caused, listen to this, by collisions of fast-moving molecules with the walls of a container. And so pressure is increases as the number of molecular collisions and the pace of those collisions in a particular area increases, and then those collisions begin to bounce into the walls of a container. Fascinating. So the more the collisions, the higher the pressure. To stretch that to our experience as humans, so just think about this. The walls may represent the boundaries we are experiencing, and the collisions represent the changes or differences between what is and what might be next that is different. So when it comes to personal pressure, think about this. What is it that's colliding? What is it that's colliding? And how does that create pressure? Well, here's a couple of things to think about to connect some of those physical sciences to psychological science. So one possibility is there is what I would describe as an intra personal collision, which would be it's where there's a collision between there's a conflict or a collision of thinking within us, where our old idea is confronted by our new idea. And one of the things that's described at in psychology is cognitive dissonance. If there's a difference between what I'm thinking and about and what I'm doing, what I think about something and what I'm doing with regard to that something, that we will experience a dissonance, and we will make attempts to decrease that dissonance, or that difference, if you will. Now, what's also interesting is another kind of collision that occurs is what I would describe as an environmental collision, where we are experience a collision between what it is we think needs to happen and what the environment around us may be saying has to happen. And so that's kind of an interesting collision as well. But there's a third level that is probably the most common in the research that we did around pressure, where we're experiencing an interpersonal collision, a colliding of convictions, if you will, between us and others, or one other person, or many other people. And that's another common. So I think what's interesting is just to begin to think about our experiences of our world right now, and to think about the places where you feel pressure. And even if you look at that, in your leading under pressure inventory, if you've used the tool, and to say, what kind of pressure am I facing right now? Is it intrapersonal within me? Is it environmental, between me and my environment? Or is it interpersonal, where it's between me and other people, that relational kind of collision that occurs? I think that's a great place to start this conversation, is to be able to think about that, because the meta kind of leadership thinking would be to actually be able to name it and to understand it. And in future weeks and future conversations, what we're going to do is unpack. So what are the strategies that allow people to actually show up in that pressure more intentionally? So that's going to be the start of this conversation, and I hope you have a good one.